My name is Keri Barnum for New Shelves Books, and we are here to talk about the business of being an author, marketing, publishing, and everything in between, whether you're self-published, traditionally published. It really doesn't matter because many of us, even though we have different routes, have the same questions. We're running into the same issues as we're marketing our books. So we talk about it here on Free Advice Friday. You can join us live by going to newshelves.com/FAF. We meet Fridays at 10 a.m. Eastern, and we also do put up our replays on YouTube, which is just youtube.com/New Shelves Books. So you have multiple ways to watch. If you can't join live because of timing, work, whatever it is, you can certainly email in questions and join us with those replays as well. So we do have some questions live, and we also have just some things going on in the publishing world that we're going to talk about today. So let's start with Jackie's question. In a press release, if you use a secondary color other than black to make a sentence stand out, what color is best to use so you don't exclude someone with color blindness or make it harder to read? That's an interesting question. So I will say typically in press releases, news releases, anything like that, typically they are all done in black and white because that's mostly how things are printed. Also, because when you're using a press release distribution service, anything like that, it's all black and white. So the standard is black and white. If you are choosing to use a color for your own purposes when creating a press release for your website or to pitch to local news, something like that, and you're going to use another color, I would be very careful of using anything that is too light. That can be hard to see. So like a light yellow, a purple, anything that doesn't have stark contrast against a white page, I would kind of avoid. And then as far as color blindness, there is red-green color blindness and blue-yellow color blindness are kind of the general types of color blindness that we see. And red-green is more common, I believe. And red-green is not just red and green, and it actually is a range. So for example, pink oftentimes cannot be seen if you have red-green color blindness. However, brown doesn't really look like brown because it's actually got a lot of shades of red in it. And so that can be hard to see. And with green, we're talking about not just stark green as we might see like a grass green, but any shades in between often look gray, which may make things look lighter. And again, that is where doing a lighter color can be harder to read because many of us, even if we don't have diagnosed color blindness. It is a spectrum, and many times people have different, just like with vision, some of us have perfect vision and some of us need glasses. Same thing with color blindness. Some people have a spectrum of color blindness. And so just think that any color that you might be using, the ability to stand out on the page is really important. So like a light green will be harder to read because it'll show up for someone with red-green color blindness as gray, and the lighter it is, the lighter gray it is. Same thing for blue yellow, although that is less common. And again, it's just a range of it. So with that said, standard is black and white. If you're going to use a color, make sure that it's bold, that it's bright. And I would say it just depends. If you're trying to match kind of the color of your book cover, or if you're trying to go with a theme color, that's one of the things that, you might consider is, are you matching that? I recently had an author who's got this beautiful cover. Well, I mean, it's beautiful, but it is a thriller cover and it's black and white. And then it's got these strips of purple that go over it. And it's kind of meant to kind of mimic like tape over someone's mouth. It's a thriller, suspense. And those strips are a very light purple and it looks beautiful on the cover. But then the author then wanted to use that purple as a standout color on her website. The problem we ran into is it was very hard to read, so we ended up having to put a shadow underneath of it that was black and gray to make that purple stand out. So if you're trying to offset your cover or something like that, that makes sense aesthetically, but it may be hard to read, and you've just got to use your judgment on that. Very commonly, if we're going to use color, we're going to use a bold font, we're going to use bold print, something like that. So no specifics on color, but some tips on color blindness. My husband is actually colorblind. It runs in his family. So many of the men in my husband's family are colorblind, which is why I know so much about it. Let's see. All right. Is the term story pitch the same as elevator pitch? Pretty much. Um, People will call it different things, and sometimes it depends on where in the industry they're coming from. So, for example, many times in marketing, we'll talk about an elevator pitch, and that doesn't matter if we're talking about books, a product, or anything like that. And the idea is that you can explain your product, you can pitch it on an elevator ride. It probably, I would love to actually look into that. It probably stems back from like people trying to like pitch people in elevators in like the 1950s. I don't know that for sure. I'm just guessing, but it would be a fun story. So I'm going to look it up. But that's the idea of an elevator pitch. Can you, in a few sentences, pitch and win someone over to your idea? And in a movie, for example, if we were pitching for film, we would call it a log line. If you are at a book writing conference, sometimes it might be called your elevator pitch, it might be called your story pitch. It might be called something different. I've heard a lot of names for it, but it's essentially all of the same things. Um, it's one of those things where it's just the idea of can you concisely tell me what your book is about? I cannot tell you how often I ask people, oh, you're writing a book. What's it about? Sometimes they even know they're going to be talking to me. So, like, they knew in advance. It's not a surprise that we're chatting. They knew I was going to ask about their book. It takes anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes for them to tell me what their book is about. It's kind of like this, but then it's like this. And if you mix this and this, or if you did that and this, and anything that needs that much explaining is not going to sell. So either the problem is that the story is too complicated and we need to revisit that, or we really need to work on that pitch and get it more concise because what that tells me is you don't know what your story is about and you can't sell something that you can't describe. I can't tell you there's a new candy on the market and you should go buy it. I mean, I can't tell you, but there's a new candy on the market and you should go buy it. And you tell me, oh, what kind of candy? Well, it's kind of like a hard candy, but it's not a hard candy because it doesn't crunch in your mouth, but it's not a soft candy because it doesn't get stuck in your teeth. So it's just kind of like a hardish soft candy. Yeah. And then you go, oh, okay, well, what flavor is it? Comes in a lot of flavors, but it's kind of like if you mix bubble gum with root beer and then you throw on some peppermint and then I think sometimes it comes in blue raspberry, but not blue. It's just raspberry. But the color is yellow. Do we see how this doesn't work? We're not selling it. And so that's the importance of an elevator pitch or a story pitch or a log line is that you are really concisely thinking about what exactly your story is about, what moves it forward. And knowing that about your book is not only good for your own marketing, for your own knowledge, it's really great for when people ask, whether it be at a book conference. If you, I mean, you never know who you're going to meet when you're going to meet them. My husband and I were talking about this last night because he was telling me a story of someone who literally just happened to have like chance after chance after chance to pitch their story. And because they knew it and they were concise with it, it kept getting passed along. And it was just luck, honestly. It's one of those things, and we don't talk about it enough in the industry that so much of success or chances really is luck. Now, luck can only be made when you create the opportunity. So when you go to conferences, when you talk to someone on the elevator, when you make opportunity, when you talk about your book and market your book. But when you have the opportunity, nailing the pitch is the difference of getting a request for a manuscript of, oh, by the way, I'm a movie producer or, someone I know is this. I'd love to see the book. And I can tell you from experience that someone who doesn't know what their book is about is someone that no one in the industry wants to work with. We don't want to publish your book because if you can't tell us what it's about, we're guessing it's not very exciting or it's going to be really messy and need a lot of work. If you don't know what your book is about, we don't want to market your book because if you don't know what your book is about, I can't sell your book. If you're telling me that your book is five different genres, I'm sitting here going, that's going to be a hard sell because people tend to read within a specific genre and there's different constructs and expectations within genre. So we have this tendency to not want to exclude anyone or to want to make sure that our book is perfect for everyone. I've said before, and I'll say again, the only thing that's perfect for everyone is Christmas. And if you don't like Christmas, then, well, you're weird, but also I respect that. But the idea is that books aren't for everyone. Movies aren't for everyone. I wouldn't recommend a movie to someone with a 2-year-old that I would recommend to someone with a 15-year-old. It's not for everyone. It's why we have ratings. It's why we have genres. Same thing with books. We have to stop trying to say our book is for everyone. It's not to say pretty much anyone could enjoy it. Who is your book for? What does your character do? What is your genre? These are the things that your log line should have. It should immediately give us a feel. And yes, oftentimes in log lines or pitches, you'll have people do those connection sentences where it's like, if you enjoyed this and this, you would enjoy this. So if you enjoyed Jurassic Park and Independence Day, you will love this alien dinosaur crossover book. I mean, it's weird, but you immediately kind of got a visual, didn't you? And that's the point of it. So we can do that with books as well. If you really enjoy Nicholas Sparks and Sarah J. Maas, you will love this. It's a adult fantasy with heart and deep romance. Again, we get the idea. So those can be helpful as well in a log line, but you still have to know your story. Who's your main character? What are they doing and why do I care? Are some of the questions that you kind of ask yourself there. So maybe we should have a pitch session where we just get together and pitch each other and see how it works out. But I think that is one of the really important things in the industry is to know what you're writing about concisely. That's not to say you don't have longer descriptions, but you should absolutely have your very quick couple of sentence pitch for sure. Let's see. Let's actually dive into this one because I thought it was super interesting. Talking about print sales, it's one of the things that definitely caught my eye in the last 2 weeks, I guess. I think I actually read this article last Friday. Talking about print sales and how print sales have technically fallen in the first half of 2025, meaning that print sales in the first half of 2025 have been lower than print sales were at this same period in 2024. However, I always like to look not only are print sales up or down, but also in what sections are they up or down? What's making them go up or down? Because sometimes if we have a breakout seller that sold millions of copies in the first quarter, well, then yeah, sales are down, but that doesn't mean it's doom and gloom for everybody. It means one person who got a whole lot of sales did not get those sales this year. So, what we are seeing as far as book sales, really interesting that what's down the most is adult nonfiction. So, adult nonfiction is down 3 million units, according to Publishers Lunch, which is one of the newsletters I subscribe to, highly recommend, and down 3 million units for the first half of 2025. And we've been kind of seeing this slow change and shift of where nonfiction is falling off a little bit. And one of the things that's interesting to note is that nonfiction is down 3 million units compared to the first half of 2024, despite the fact that Mel Robbins' The Let Them Theory has 1.8 million units in sales. So this I find interesting because adult nonfiction is kind of underperforming and those numbers include someone who's doing really, really well and selling a lot of copies, which tells me that adult nonfiction is kind of slowing down overall. And so if you are a nonfiction author, especially in adults, I think that's something to take note of if you've seen slower sales. Don't give up. Know that it's part of the industry, but if you're doing really well in adult nonfiction, also give yourself a pat on the back and whatever you're doing, keep on doing it. Um, Adult fiction slowed as well. So this was slowed a little bit. We're down about 1 million units from this time last year, but that's mostly because Sarah J. Maas is her books that were a breakout in 2024 are slowing down this year. So again, this is one of those things I like to pay attention to and look at those pros and cons because as we're looking at the fiction there, yes, it's slowing down a little bit, but what drove it last year was one author. So this does not mean that fiction overall is down. In fact, romance and women's fiction continues to climb, but overall we're down because of one author who had a breakout hits actually, is not selling as much. So that makes me say, as far as the adult market, things are pretty much chugging along as usual. And so if you're seeing a big decrease in sales and you write an adult fiction, then that's one of the things I'd say, that might be me or my books and not the market. See, is adult nonfiction inclusive of memoir and biography? It sure is. While sometimes there's this gray line between nonfiction and fiction for memoir in particular, it is creative nonfiction. It is classified as nonfiction. So it is in those numbers. Memoir and biography, if you do not already have a platform, if you are not kind of celebrity, those titles are absolutely down. It can be a really hard sell unless you have another topic or angle that happens to be popular or trending. And I hate that because so many authors do write their story, and it's not that you don't have something important to say or something that people can benefit from or be encouraged from, but memoir can be a very hard sell. We tend to have these breakout hits that get a lot of attention, but overall, it's not something that if you love to do book clubs and you're talking to people, if you love to like actively tell your story and tie it into your book, those are selling. But the average person or author who's really just focused more on book sales, not becoming a content creator or getting yourself out there a ton, it can be harder to sell those. And we've seen that trend going on for several years. Um, Interestingly enough, that children's books for infants in particular are seeing an increase. So there's an increase in children's books for infants. I'd be curious to see if that is connected in any way to a incline in birth rates. I'm not sure, but that's what this is how my mind works. It's like, oh, heard something. Let me think here and here and here and here. But it does make me wonder if there is a increase in birth rates along with books for infants because books for infants are up. Now, middle grade readers are kind of just declining. And we've talked about this before. Middle grade can be so hard because middle grade books is when kids tend to get devices. It's when they start to have phones, and they really, in my experience, middle grade readers are the least interested in reading. They're kind of out from having parents and teachers and grandparents read to them. They're not quite in that young adult range where maybe they're coming back to books. Middle grade has had some really high ups and things like that, but it's definitely declining and has been declining in recent years, which I hate to see. It's one of the things I always encourage is my middle graders to read because I think it's really important, but also because I think that they're kind of they're kind of the forgotten middle, I think, too often. So even if your kids aren't reading, let's say middle grade level books, having middle graders read anything is just such a good thing to do. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I feel very, very, very strongly about this. Interestingly enough, while the sales were kind of down overall, even though, we broke those down kind of by grouping. We're down overall with book units. The actual dollars were up slightly. So we have seen some of the publishers increasing pricing, especially on hardcover. So the overall dollars were up, even though the unit numbers were down. So publishing as a whole is looking very steady. We've certainly seen some really great growth over the last couple of years. Again, mostly in women's fiction and romance, a lot in romantasy. But overall, I think that the more people read, the more people they talk about books. The more people who don't usually talk about books are going, oh, maybe I should read a book. So I actually have people who they're like, I'm not a reader. So let's keep in mind I don't read. What should I read this summer? And I get this question all the time, and it's always so fun for me. It's like matchmaking. I'm like, well, what kind of movies do you like? What shows do you like? You might like this or that. And it always makes me so happy when they come back to me and they're like, I couldn't put it down. And look, we get our fun where we can. But speaking of that, we're also seeing where, while we have some declining print sales in some cases, audiobooks are still going really strong. We're seeing more and more movement with Spotify, which publishers are starting to report that they are seeing profits from Spotify as Spotify is bringing over some of those people who listen to podcasts. And I'm fun and interesting stuff showing up. It used to be, did you even read if it was an audiobook? And can we put it on our Goodreads to read or we read it? It's all silly. If you read, you read, who cares? But I've been seeing some really interesting and fun things. I have a friend that I've known for a long time who listens to audiobooks to and from work, and she posts her review about these audiobooks all the time. And people love it because they're audiobooks, and I think this is very interesting. The audiobooks I listen to are typically not the books I would read, meaning that if I were choosing something for fun and pleasure and I was picking up a book, I choose one genre. But if I'm going to an audiobook, I am more likely to listen to nonfiction on audiobook. I'm more likely to listen to memoir on audiobook. And so I think it's kind of interesting how we are attracted to audiobook and how it changes dependent on how we're consuming it, and seeing fun things like there is a audiobook walking clubs that are taking like where people are like, all right, we're gonna listen to our audiobook while we're walking, and then they discuss it at the end. So that is such a fun way to connect audiobooks and books and reading to exercise and healthy living. So I love to see the different ways that people are taking books and applying it, from in-person book clubs, no matter how you read it, to these audiobook walking clubs, to seeing actually people like having read-ins and different things like that. I love that we are seeing books becoming culturally, again, kind of a part of the conversation and something that people can do together. It used to be that people would sit in a living room and everyone would kind of read. You didn't have to talk, you didn't have to do anything. It was acceptable to just read a book. And then there was a kind of period of time where that was not acceptable. And now we're bringing it back into where, like, we want those friends who are willing to just read in the same room as us so we can have company, but we can have our books. Um, so I just think it's really interesting how that's adapting over time and how it's influencing how people read, for sure. Let's see. In other news in publishing, TikTok. I did promise to talk about TikTok demographics. I'm going to drop a link in here. It is from Sandra Beckwith over at Build Book Buzz. And she recently posted an article about TikTok demographics, which I went over and I looked at because I have done quite a bit of research on social media and demographics and things like that. So I was interested to see if there's anything new or changing that Sandra had found. And the demographics for TikTok have pretty much stayed consistent. A lot of her research was from 2024, and I believe that's around the same time I'd done mine. But I thought it was super interesting. So I'm sharing it again. And again, I posted that link. It's on her blog, Build Book Buzz. And as far as who's using TikTok, there's 2 million users, or I'm sorry, 2 billion users worldwide, and increasing over time. And in the US specifically, because as many of us know who have ever been on TikTok, if you are on TikTok, when you are posting or you're doing reels or anything, you really, one of the things that TikTok does is it really goes on your own algorithm and it features to your own area. So actually, I have some people who will purposely have an assistant in another country or a different state so that when they post, they're getting exposure different places, which I think is very interesting. But in the US specifically, 55% of users are younger than 30, and the largest proportion of them are between 25 and 34. So I think that's really interesting is that 55% of users are younger than 30. I don't think that really surprises anyone. Not to say older people aren't on TikTok, but it definitely took off with the younger demographic, particularly in that in the age ranges in the late teens to 20s. In fact, a little more than 3/4 of the US users on TikTok are 18 to 24 years old. Now, this makes so much sense when we think about the books that have taken off on TikTok. The books that have taken off on TikTok traditionally have been true crime. This age demographic is really interested in true crime. We've seen some with kind of some fantasy fiction or sci-fi, though not as much. Crime novels, the same thing, some, but not as much. But we've seen a huge increase in women's fiction and romance. And many of those are actually in the younger demographic. They're in their early 20s, although women who are in their 30s are also one of the main demographics on TikTok. So again, it really does make sense. Although male users dominate TikTok overall. So male users are 55.7%, whereas females are 44.3%. So I think that is interesting, and that's US specific. If we're looking globally, women dominate at 54.8%. And again, the if we look at male, female users overall globally, we're looking at 25 to 34-year-olds. Again, when we look at the genres that are taking off, this makes sense. And if we are looking at profiles, so people who are, we're talking about the difference of people who like will watch a TikTok video but don't have TikTok or don't have active profiles versus people who are active users have profiles. Only about 58% of people globally have profiles. A lot of people watch videos or kind of lurk on there, but don't have active profiles. But if we're talking about Gen Z, which is people who are in the 13 to 28 range, 82% of them have TikTok. So all of those details, what does it mean? Why does it matter in relation to authors? Um, as far as authors go in TikTok, and I've said this a long time, I always get questions. I got someone this week saying, "Oh, I want to run TikTok ads and TikTok, TikTok, TikTok," because we hear about book talk and we hear about how this has moved sales, and obviously people are interested. It just makes sense, and it's smart to look at anything that's working for other people. But when we look at TikTok, what people don't always realize is just because it's moved so many millions of copies of books doesn't mean that it's moved those copies of books across genres or across readers. Again, we've seen a huge increase in women's fiction, romance, and romantasy, and that is a very large demographic on TikTok. So it makes sense that people who are posting to TikTok who have those types of books are seeing an increase. But if you have a memoir and you're posting on TikTok, you may not be getting the same kind of oomph that someone else is. So there is no one size fits all for any social media. But also, I want to point out that on TikTok, when we mostly hear about people going viral, when we hear about crazy book sales and things like that, in most cases, these people are not running TikTok ads. In fact, the TikTok publisher that started maybe 2 years ago, is already out of business. They could not market and sell their own books on TikTok because that's not how people are buying books. It's not based on ads. It's not when we talk about the big publishers who have, tried doing ads on the marketplace, they're not getting the same results. What's driving sales on TikTok is people who are creating content. The authors that I know or who have read about have looked at their stats and things like that, who are selling tons of copies on TikTok, typically have 1 to 3 profiles. Some of them have multiple profiles where they are posting on TikTok, most of them 3 to 6 times a day, meaning that these people are creating videos on TikTok. If they've got one profile, 3 to 6 videos a day. If they have 3 profiles, guys, they are posting like 18 videos a day. And so this is the case of, again, time or money. In many cases, they are using this. There's actually some softwares that will scan through your book and pull out, it's AI, but it'll pull out like the best hook lines and things like that. And people are using this if they're comfortable with AI. If they're not, they're doing this manually, but they are creating videos multiple times a day, and they're doing it constantly. In almost every case where I've read about this, and I've talked to people who are doing this, it took them a long time to go viral. Many times they were doing this for months to even years before they took off. And they burn out. I mean, understandably, 18 videos a day is a lot. And so in many, many cases, they burn out and they either just stop posting because they get exhausted or they don't have time to write, or they're writing so much that they're just burning out. But so they burn out or they end up having to outsource it, and they're outsourcing these videos to other people, which may or may not work as well, just depends on the fit with the social media person. But this is not where they're getting an influencer to market their book. I also get asked about this a lot. Is it worth it to get an influencer to talk about my book? Not unless that influencer is already building a audience of your market. Meaning, if there is an influencer who does book marketing and they already mostly read a certain genre and you get them to talk about your book, yes, that can help. But just paying an influencer to talk about your book because they have a big name when they don't really have a book audience doesn't pan out. I've even seen creators who do a lot of creating and they have a lot of followers, but then they try to write a book and it goes nowhere because their audience is not a reading audience. They're a video audience focused on whatever it is. So some people will read it because of the creator, but a lot of people don't. So influencer marketing on TikTok or anywhere for that matter only really works if that person is already very much speaking to your market. If they're not, you're going to pay a lot of money in some cases, thousands of dollars in some cases, for a 30-second video that's not going to mean much. It's not going to really push the sales. So in my opinion, I would treat where we're creating awareness, saying as recommended by or something like that, but it's not the marketing that's going to move book sales. Um, and also keeping in mind that so ads, not really the thing. It's really content. And if you're going to do content, you really have to be committed to it. It can take a long time and you have to be careful not to burn out. So when we talk about TikTok and is it right for you and should I do it? I think there's a lot of considerations. It's as much as Facebook gets hate. Facebook ads are easy to run and to manage and not be in it all the time. And they work for most books and genres, not across the board. I've talked about that, but they work for most books and genres. So if someone's saying, hey, I really hate social media, I don't have a lot of time, should I be on TikTok? I'm usually going, no, probably not, but you might do Facebook ads. Facebook connects to Instagram, so you can do Facebook and Instagram ads. Now, these ads are going to market your book. Are they helped if you're consistently posting and building a brand in those places? Of course. They still work even if you're not doing that in many cases. So we have to look at our resources, our time, our money, and decide where we can best put those things. And TikTok is amazing for book sales. It has done amazing things for the reading community, especially in that younger demographic. but it's still not for everybody. It's not magic. Getting in front of an influencer with a lot of TikTok followers does not mean your book is going to sell. And I wish more people talked about that. Not just that TikTok sells books, but what it takes to be successful on TikTok and what it takes to sell books on TikTok, because that is very different. And also, the book talk community began very organically. It began with people just talking about books they love. And we have found again and again that when people try to push sales, when we try to monetize that system, that it just doesn't work as well because it's not building that community, that trust in the review that makes people go and buy books. So it's not a magic bullet that's just going to sell every book. And I think looking at the demographics and looking at the information, we also have to look at that information that it's not magic. It works for some books, not for others. And it's not right for every book, even though the statistics tell us that book talk is driving the needle for sales. Let's see. Elle's asking about Find a Way voices going away. And yes, I did talk about this at length last week, so I won't rehash all of that. You can watch the replays, but Find a Way is going away. It's being absorbed into in audio. And Spotify is really, even though Spotify owns Find a Way and in audio, audio is becoming TikTok, so changing the name starting August 1st, and Spotify is splitting away. So Spotify is, on its own platform. You'll have to upload your books there specifically. We did have a question from Terry as a follow-up to last week asking about Spotify's terms of service. So here's the thing. Will the terms of service for Find a Way Voices update when it officially transfers into in audio on August 1st? And will we then see Spotify's terms of service change for audiobooks? I don't know. We might, but we haven't gotten to that point. So that is one of the things. I haven't seen any new terms of service, nor have I heard about it in the industry. So will the terms of service change on August 1st with that changeover? It's very possible, even likely, I would say, but we haven't seen anything. As far as Spotify's terms of service, for audiobooks, I personally have not heard or seen of a change with the split. So we were already under Spotify's terms of service because Spotify owns Findaway. So we were kind of already under those, and we were already seeing language for Spotify. And I have not seen that change as they've split. But again, once it's official, August 1st, will we see more of that? I really don't know. There's a lot of talk in the industry, of course, about is Spotify good or bad? How do they treat artists? How much money do they take versus all other things? And I think that'll be ongoing. But I will say that publishers are very much saying that they're increasing their profits with Spotify, using them for audiobooks. And do the big guys probably have different agreements than the smaller players? I'm sure that they do. But I do think that overall it's given those with audiobooks a new opportunity, a new platform, and they do pay. They have the listening minutes that they have on the premium accounts for Spotify that authors get paid for. I've seen that personally in accounts and outright sales. So will terms of service change? I don't know. You guys know that I am on all the newsletters and I watch all the things. So if I do see anything change, I will for sure let you know. But I don't think that we would see anything until after the official change and shift in August. So next week, I may have a different story for you. But for now, I am not necessarily seeing that. And as far as is it exclusive? No, I've not seen exclusivity on an audiobook agreement from Spotify. So as we know, Amazon with ACX has the option of being exclusive with a higher royalty rate or not being exclusive and you get a lower royalty rate. I have not seen anything from Spotify asking for exclusive distribution. That's not really anything I'm worried about at the moment, although maybe they might try to play that game, but I haven't seen much on that, or I haven't seen anything on that. So if it comes up, I will let you guys know. But as of right now, I don't have that kind of information, nor do I have those fears or concerns either at the moment. Let's see. Oh, another thing I found this week that I thought was very interesting. Of course, AI, and it's coming up, but I found it very interesting that there are new studies being done talking about how ChatGPT is not only changing how we may write things because people are using ChatGPT and it's changing how they write, but further than that, ChatGPT and large language models are changing the words that we use in conversation according to a recent article that I found very interesting. This came from Scientific American, and it's this article about how ChatGPT is changing the words that we use in conversation because ChatGPT, goodness, I can't speak, is a large language model and it's got similarities. It's got kind of tells of things that come up in um, the writing that then turns into how we speak. And I thought that was interesting that what's written or what we're reading or ingesting turns into the words that we use. And so some of the questions that they found that we have used on a increasing frequency because it's shown up in chat GPT in a writing, one of the words was the delve. Let's delve into that. I think that's funny. I think I've been using that for a long time, but now I'm sitting here thinking back, like, has it changed me? And this article, I'll drop it in the chat in a minute, but this article was specifically going into different sectors. So not just like, okay, we're using delve more, but delve is showing up more in business, in education, and religion and spirituality. It's going down in sports. So I think that was interesting. Another word that came up as being used often was boast, this boast of something else. Other words were swift, inquiry, and meticulous. So I just thought it was interesting because I think that speaks to not only how ChatGPT might be changing how we're writing and how we're thinking, but it got me interested in thinking about how throughout history, what's written really affects the words we use. So, for example, what you read as a kid in the books that you read and whatever words were in there become the words that we tend to use in our own life. I had this absolute adoration of this series as a kid that was written a long time ago. It was written I believe late 1800s, maybe early 1900s, and they had a lot of words like fortnight and not like the game, like 2 weeks, a fortnight, and different things like that. And it's funny because I still use those terms. So it really got me interested in thinking about how what we ingest one way or another, whether it be the people we're around, the articles we're reading, whether it be ChatGPT because we're using it as a research tool or using it to write, to the authors that we read, how those things become part of what we put into the world, whether or not we're using these large language models, I think is kind of aside from the fact that whatever we ingest tends to be somehow internalized and is part of what we put out. If we read a lot of Nancy Drew as a kid and we're writing mysteries, chances are there are little hints of that. If we read a lot of romance novels as a kid, chances are that's influencing any romance scenes that you're writing. If you loved Westerns and you were watching them as a kid, probably influences your main characters. So it just really got me into thinking, not specifically about ChatGPT, although I do think that's very interesting, but how what we take in is often what we put out in some way or another, whether it be through written, it's the energy we take in, whether you want to call it energy or attitude, whatever it is, a lot of what we take in is what we put out. And it was a great reminder, not to get too deep here, but it was a great reminder to myself of, the energy or the vibe, whatever you want to call it, of what we're putting out and what we want to take in, and surrounding yourself with what you want to reflect. And so that went a little deep, but those were the things that it kind of made me think of, aside from just the absolutely interesting aspects of how ChatGPT is affecting our everyday words. So Um, this I was appalled when I did a private search on myself to find an AI answer that included she feels. Yeah, there's all sorts of things that will tell us all sorts of things. And I've actually had several people reach out to me at New Shelves recently who say they found me from ChatGPT and AI. Um, so pros and cons from everything, but I thought it was really interesting. All right, you guys, it's the end of the hour. Thanks for being here and hanging out with me this Friday morning. I'll be back next Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern. Join me. If you have questions, email them in info@newshelves.com. You don't have to wait till Friday. If you email them, I save them. And of course, you can bring your questions live next Friday as well. I'll see you here at the same time, same place. Have a great weekend. Bye, everybody.